Story 1. I worked in a lead manufacturing plant for a summer, and it was very challenging. Full safety gear was required at all times, with temperatures exceeding 110 degrees. Blood tests were conducted every month, and the work involved constant physical labor in extremely hazardous conditions. Every task required focus, as mistakes could be fatal, especially due to the risk of lead poisoning. Story 2. Oil rig working on the drill floor. I lived in a place with many chain throwers for a while and found out that everyone I knew who worked offshore was addicted to something. Not even to get high, just because their bodies were so worn down and they needed extra help to move. Story 3. Coal miner in Appalachia underground with no natural light doing physically demanding work for 10 to 12 hours a day. Story 4. Steep terrain logger. Climbing a mountain for 12 hours a day, every day wearing studded boots and chaps, carrying cans of fuel, an axe, and a 25-pound saw. Even if you do everything perfectly, there's always a chance of dying from a hazard you didn't see. Story 5. Mortuary removal was quite challenging. It involved figuring out how to remove corpses from houses, recliners, bathtubs, and other areas, especially considering that a significant portion of Americans struggle with obesity. Once, I had to call the fire department to cut through a wall to remove a person who was unable to fit through the door. Story 6. Woodland firefighter. I have a tough friend who, starting at 12 years old, would go to the northern mountains of British Columbia to plant trees with his dad. When he turned 17, he did it himself, allowing him to save $20,000 over 3 months. It's arduous, 3 months in the humid heat filled with mosquitoes in the middle of nowhere. He took remote and physically intensive jobs that paid well to fund his education. That said, he mentioned the worst job he ever had was removing dead trees as a woodland firefighter. He got sick on the first day. He was a built, strong guy and came back in much better shape. I don't think he lasted the entire summer. There were 1 or 2 trips left, but he decided against it and never returned to that line of work. He is one of the most resilient people I know. Story 7. Any trade that involves attic work. My experience is in electrical, but various types of trades occur in that space. The average temperature is around 130 degrees Fahrenheit, which is extreme. Story 8. A roofer in Gulf Coast heat and humidity faces intense labor, and the already unbearable heat becomes magnified. Story 9. Emergency room nursing involves chaos. Doors don't close. A patient needs immediate attention after a heart attack. A family member is overwhelming us with questions. Another patient is agitated, and we have multiple trauma cases arriving simultaneously. Additionally, a miner is experiencing a severe reaction after consuming too many edibles while on psychiatric medication. I've taken over 60,000 steps for more than 12 hours on challenging days, with my average heart rate in the 140s the entire time. I'm not certain if nursing is the hardest profession, but it's definitely one of the most demanding. Story 10. The one you dislike, the one where you feel trapped. There are jobs where you can work for 16 hours straight, feel physically exhausted, but still go home happy and proud. The mind-body connection is very real, and suffering takes a toll on the body. Story 11. Have you ever had to get a 500-pound person down 3 flights of narrow stairs in 105-degree weather? Oh, and they are in critical condition, so you better hurry. I would go with firefighter, paramedic, or emergency medical services. Story 12. Order selector at a distribution center. Hundreds of cases per day, often bending and twisting under pallet racking. Story 13. I have done various manual labor jobs in my life, such as furniture mover and landscaper. While there were others, those were physically the hardest. Moving furniture usually wasn't that bad, except for rare occasions involving a heavy desk, hutch, or an odd piano. Most items, like couches, are surprisingly light. Old appliances, such as freezers and washers, can be much heavier than newer ones. Landscaping ranged from fairly light tasks, like mowing, weeding, and edging a lawn, to extremely demanding work, such as moving 40 yards of topsoil from a pile in the client's driveway to their backyard through a long, circuitous uphill path using 6 cubic-foot wheelbarrows. I routinely lifted over 100 pounds onto my shoulders and above my head to dump into the back of a truck. Nowadays, you could rent a sod cutter, But there were many times we had to remove an existing lawn using picks, which meant bending over and swinging a pick to pull the grass out by the roots for 10 straight hours. It was hard work. 5 to 6 years after transitioning to several new jobs, many of which were desk jobs, I bought my first house. I thought I would remove the small backyard that had essentially grown wild on fill dirt. I figured it would take 4 hours to remove with a pick, given that it would have taken me 2 to 3 hours back when I did landscaping. Took over 8 hours that first day of swinging away with the pick, and I didn't finish. The next morning, I took a swing with the pick and felt so sore that I could barely keep going. I completed the task, though. That was my welcome to being 30 years old moment. Story 14. Almost anything related to patient care in medicine can be challenging. I was an emergency medical technician, and that physically involved some of the most strenuous activities I have experienced. As a result, I have 2 herniated discs in my lower back. I currently work as a patient care assistant, and the turning, moving, and assisting patients with standing are again some of the most challenging activities for my body. Story 15. Health aides assist with bathing, often independently. Their patients can be large, unable to assist, or combative. It is a very demanding job that does not pay well. As a nurse, I have nothing but respect for these individuals. Story 16. Zookeeping is challenging. It involves a lot of physical work, often in extreme temperatures, dealing with stubborn goats that refuse to enter their stalls, getting butted by sheep, and managing various animal injuries. Story 17. Land surveying is generally straightforward. However, land surveying for timber companies in the Pacific Northwest can be quite challenging. Carrying tripods, instruments, fiberglass rods, and heavy equipment up and down rainy cliffs and mountains, clearing lines, marking trees, and driving tall hubs 2 feet into the ground, starting above your head with the side of your axe, is not typical for most surveyors. Story 18. Fighter pilots and astronauts experience situations that subject their bodies to G-forces that humans are not typically accustomed to. This is similar to why race car driving is much more challenging than many people realize. Story 19. Nurses have a very high rate of musculoskeletal injuries. I am on disability due to repeated back injuries from nursing. Which profession is at greatest risk for musculoskeletal disorders? High-risk occupations for musculoskeletal disorders include registered nurses, nursing assistants, and psychiatric aides, firefighters and prevention workers, laborers and freight, stock and material movers, janitors and cleaners, heavy and tractor-trailer truck drivers, refuse and recyclable material collectors, stock clerks and order fillers. Story 20. If what I have heard about surgeons working over 100-hour weeks without much sleep is true, then that is probably among the most demanding jobs. Story 21. People will probably never say truck driver, but honestly, you have no idea the endurance required for driving 11 hours a day for at least 6 days a week. It takes perfect time management skills, the ability to drive in snow, knowledge of when to pull over, skills to secure your load, basic math skills, and memorization of the interstate system. Story 22. Farriers, stonemasons, and various construction-related professions require significant physical and mental stamina. Chefs often work long hours without breaks. Nurses and surgeons also demonstrate both physical and mental endurance to navigate long shifts without errors. Story 23. From personal experience at a glass manufacturing plant, specifically in the furnace area, it was hard labor in temperatures exceeding 140 degrees around the clock. We were supposed to rotate every 15 minutes to rehydrate, but there was so much abuse at the plant that I remember having to work close to an hour and a half straight before I collapsed from heat exhaustion. When the plant manager asked why I fainted, the foreman unfairly blamed me and had me fired for working in an unsafe manner, despite being the one who told me to tough it out after an hour without water. I am a veteran who completed 3 deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq and was accustomed to high heat environments. At a certain point, your body just gives out. All of this was for $10 per hour. In 2008, during the recession, it was the only work I could find right after leaving the military. Story 24. For me, it was the jobs that required me to stand in one place for a long time. I had a security position where I had to stand still and move around very little, which used to cause pain in my back and feet. I have done many other manual labor jobs, and they were not nearly as taxing. Story 25. Let me just say this thread is why I get frustrated with people who believe work ethic and pay are directly proportional. I have encountered executives and bankers who assume they work hard because they analyze spreadsheets for 60 hours a week. Story 26. Wildland firefighter is hands down one of the hardest civilian jobs available, far more physically demanding than miners, oil riggers, or construction workers. These individuals hike up and down mountains in 100-degree heat while carrying packs weighing over 50 pounds, digging fire lines, cutting and moving trees, and transporting fire hoses and other supplies. They often work for more than 16 hours a day for 14 to 21 consecutive days, sleeping in the dirt, eating meals ready to eat, and may go without a shower or cell service the entire time they are on the job. It is a highly underappreciated and underpaid occupation that rarely receives recognition. Story 27. The veterinary field is much more physically demanding than I thought when I first started. 3.5 years later, with 3 years as a kennel assistant and a few months as a veterinary assistant, I am now 21, and my body often aches from being pulled by large dogs, headbutt, scratched by dogs and cats, and bitten by several cats. Additionally, the constant bending into awkward positions while restraining animals takes a toll. I often hear from my coworkers, "Just wait until you turn 30. It all goes downhill from there." Whenever I mention my knee pain, despite this, I still love this field. Story 28. Before I joined a local utility, which can still be challenging, I was a contractor in line work. Those 112-hour weeks can be mentally and physically tough. Story 29. I don't know many older plumbers whose backs are really functional. That's a profession that is definitely hard on the body. Story 30. The workers that make bricks earn a good income, but for every year of work, it feels like 10 years of aging. Those who have been there for over 5 years look exhausted. Despite taking precautions, they are all covered in burns from molten brick from head to toe. Story 31. Landscaping is 10 times harder than it appears. You can easily walk 20 miles a day if the workload is substantial, whether in commercial or residential settings. Story 32. Depending on your workplace, wildlife biologist jobs can be quite demanding. While it may not be the hardest profession, I can hike over 15 miles in a day, with my longest hike being 17 miles. During the summer months, I can hike up to 50 miles a week, work more than 12 hours a day, and have even worked 21 consecutive days. Still, I love the job. Story 33. Maybe not physically the hardest, but there are scuba divers who dive in raw sewage to perform plumbing repairs. No thanks. Story 34. The hardest job I had was at Federal Express. My first position involved unloading trailers, which was difficult. There was no decent ventilation, and I had to sprint the entire time. My second position was loading a truck from the top of a conveyor belt. Tires, paper, and various other items were shipped to whoever was placing the orders. It was a large international truck, not a smaller one with shelves. At least that truck had air circulation. Story 35. I worked at a salmon cannery in Alaska one summer. 16-hour days, 7 days a week in the cold were the most intense work I've ever done. Story 36. Hauling hay. How about spending the hot part of the afternoon in the scorching summer throwing 40 to 70-pound bales of hay onto a truck, stacking them in the truck, driving them to an even hotter barn, and stacking them in the barn? Story 37. My mom, rest in peace, was a mail carrier for the post office. I do not recommend this job. You have to work in all types of weather. Story 38. Wildland firefighting. I am getting my red card next month to keep my options open, but it sounds intense when you look into it. Story 39. Mines. You go hundreds of meters underground, where the heat is intense and visibility is poor. The air is filled with unpleasant odors, and there are multiple risks involved, including roof collapses, toxic gases, explosions, and joint wear. In developing countries, workers are paid very little compared to the significant profits generated by the companies. Story 40. It is difficult to speak for others, but working in tree service as the new guy was quite an experience, especially during the first 2 weeks. I endured bloody blisters in borrowed boots and spent the entire day moving logs and brush. Wearing jeans was necessary to protect my legs. The job was also dangerous. I felt like I was going to get pulled into a wood chipper at one point. I drank a gallon of water without needing to use the restroom once. Gloves felt unnecessary, and logs are rough after handling a few hundred. However, it does get easier after moving 1,000 logs. Story 41. Apparently, it was my grandfather walking to school 10 miles each way, uphill both ways. There were torrential rain and 100-mile wind gusts always pointed away from his destination. Story 42. Ironworker performing the job of a connector. It is hard and physically demanding. One bad move can lead to fatal consequences. We never used harnesses in the past. I also did shutdown work as a boilermaker. I routinely worked 16-hour shifts, then around the clock until the job was finished. I crawled into the firebox, which reached temperatures of around 105 to 120 degrees. I worked 36 hours straight one time and lost about 6 pounds on a 135-pound body. Story 43. Slovakia has a car seat factory for Skoda that is brutal in some positions, such as assembling cables, plastic parts, screws while seats are moving. You need to have a lot of strength in your hands, and you stand in one spot like a robot. If you make a mistake, the whole line will stop, an alarm will go off, and at least 40 people will look at you as if you committed a serious crime. It is demanding and extremely stressful. It was brutal. After 5 months, I eventually got the job in IT that I had been waiting for. Story 44. If everyone had to roof a house in the dead of summer at least once, they would never complain about illegal immigrants coming into the country again. God bless them for making up the majority of roofers. That job is incredibly difficult. Story 45. Sulfur mining is not even close. I worked some challenging jobs in construction and was deployed to the Middle East as an infantry soldier. That was life on easy mode compared to sulfur mining. Story 46. Roofing in Florida during extreme heat is challenging, and the governor recently signed a law that does not require breaks for workers. Story 47. I was recently in Indonesia and visited Ijen volcano, where the workers hike into the caldera, collect about 100 pounds of raw sulfur, and then hike it down to the village below for processing. Aside from the toxic vapors they are inhaling, it seemed as demanding as it gets. Their footwear is inadequate. They wear cheap flip-flops. Story 48. The workers on the back of trash trucks tossing 15 tons into the hopper in all kinds of weather are putting in a tremendous effort. Story 49. Work as a roofer in the South during the summer. Alternatively, if you seek continuous work at challenging times, consider becoming a rancher and managing livestock. If something can break or go wrong, it will happen at the worst possible moment. Story 50. I have been many things, including a Marine. Wildland firefighting as a civilian is the physically hardest job I have ever had. Story 51. Tower technician climbs up to 500 feet sometimes for 12 hours. They use bottles to relieve themselves due to lack of bathroom access and do not have lunch breaks. They work with hot materials and handle steel all day while being exposed to radiation. The Texas heat is a challenging environment that they do not miss. Story 52. Brick masonry. My husband and I owned a construction company for 25 years. Watching the workers carry cinder blocks up the scaffolding is exhausting. I can only imagine how it feels. Story 53. Shrimping. I spent a few months in the Gulf of Mexico with some shrimpers, and that job is very tough. It is highly dangerous, offers little sleep, and is unpleasant for several reasons. Story 54. Not the entirety of the job involved unloading trailers for a well-known blue and yellow convenience company, which required stacking pallets 15 high. At just under 5 feet 9 inches, it was almost physically impossible unless I jumped a little to place the last ones up there. Story 55. Concrete work, stone masonry, and roofing are the toughest physical jobs I've ever done. I'm sure there are more. Story 56. The hardest job I ever had was as a laborer on a framing crew. I helped build houses in subdivisions. The pay was very low, the foreman held racist beliefs, and I lasted 18 months before finding a much better opportunity. Story 57. Anything related to manual labor, really. I have been a union carpenter for 18 years. If you are a foreman, it is both mentally and physically draining. Story 58. Construction is definitely not my strong suit, and I give major credit to those professionals out there operating equipment in extreme temperatures. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.